Hey, welcome, Takis Kinis of Realm to 69 Faces of Rock. Let's get your story straight. When did you first get interested in playing music?
Well, I guess I was pretty young. I guess first interested in playing is different than first encountering music, but I have kind of like um, a recollection of, my uncle teaching me a few chords on the guitar when I was really young, to play like Greek folk songs. And my parents saw that I kind of took to it pretty quickly. And then the following Christmas, I had a guitar under, the Christmas tree. And then, I still have that guitar. It's an old Stella Harmony acoustic. That's when I first got interested in it. And then by the time I got to be about 14, 15 years old, then I started looking for other people to play with. I had taken lessons and then got a group going. And before I knew it, within a few months of joining the group, we were playing out and playing in bars at a very young age. Probably not a good thing. But by the time I was 15, I was already playing in the clubs.
Mhm. How long before that became Realm?
Well, that's a good question. The band that I actually started when I was that young was a band called Prophet. And we did actually start by playing cover music like most people do. But very quickly we started writing because we found that we all like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Rush and bands like that. So we tried to write music that sounded like that. And that band didn't go very far, but it was a good start because we got into the recording studio and made demos and things like that. So when I got into my next band, right from the get-go, I just wanted to create original music. I didn't even want to play cover music, or if we did play cover music, to play stuff that was so obscure that nobody would know what it is.
Um, when you form Realm, what goals did you have in mind when that band formed?
That's a good question because I have to say that when we started the band, it wasn't kind of a plan to start the band. What had happened is, and this happened actually on my birthday, so it was kind of like a weird thing. So on my birthday in 1985, I showed up at rehearsal, and Paul Leganowski, who was in Realm with me, and my predecessor band said, "Hey, Mark and Tony quit." Now it's the same Mark that's in Realm, by the way, but so he was in our previous band, and then the bass player who later on, became the bass player in Nitro. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, with Michael Badio.
Yes.
Anyhow, um, but they left the band to go join a different local band that was a little bit more popular than we were. They looked nicer, they played the big clubs and drew big crowds. And then Paul are like, "Well, what are we gonna do?" And we're like, "Well, let's just do our own thing, you know." And I'm like, "That's great. No more covers. We'll just write our own music." And the goal was right from the get-go that we would write music that was simply complex. That was like a stated mission statement. So it might sound simple, but there's a lot of intricacies to it. And we just, really tried to model ourselves after some of the bands we really admired. Like Rush was way at the top of the heap in terms of bands we admired because they did have very simple song structures. But if you ever study their music, there's lots of intricacies, So we kind of wanted to do something like that.
Mhm. 2 years later, in 1987, you took a part of the Milwaukee Metal Fest.
Yes.
What do you remember from playing there? I think, did you open the fest, or was it Firing Squad who opened? I'm kind of having a dilemma
Yeah,
here.
I don't think we played first. I think you're right. We played maybe second or third or
Yes.
something like that. It's a pretty vague memory, but that was arranged by a local promoter here, Jack Koshik. And Jack went on to really promote a lot of really big events. All the metal fests here in Milwaukee. He was big into wrestling and a bunch of different things, but he basically asked us onto the bill because he knew that we drew people. And that he didn't have to pay us anything, because we were just happy to play back then. But I guess one of my fondest recollections of that particular show is a couple days before I went to that show, I had got together with one of my friends down in Lake Geneva. The guy's name is Mike Stone, and he later went on to play with Queensryche in one of their later iterations. And we were just kind of goofing around and jamming, and I was at his house, and he had put a swastika sticker on my guitar, just goofing around, and I forgot about it. And when I got to the gig and pulled the guitar out of the case, I'm like, "Oh no, there's a sticker on the guitar. I don't have any time to remove it." And I just had to play the show with the sticker on the guitar. Um, So that was kind of weird, because back then maybe it wasn't as politically correct as now, but now I look back on it and I go, so if there's any photos of that, I'd be kind of embarrassed of it. But we did have a really large skinhead contingency doing a circle while we were playing, and we were playing the song "Final Solution," swastika on the guitar, not a good combo, but but it was memorable from the fact that we got to play with really big, pretty notable bands that we admired. We didn't get to meet any of them, but we still were on the same stage. So that was really important for us for getting kind of the word out there.
And speaking of getting the word out there, Roadrunner came calling pretty soon, right? How did you get signed?
Yeah, that's a good story too, because they actually contacted us almost immediately after we started as a band. So we started in the late summer of '85, and the first thing we did is we found some other local like-minded people, and it was actually the nucleus of a band called Blood Hunt here in Milwaukee, right? It was Doug Parker, Mike Sticks, and Roger Godfrey, right? And they didn't last in the band very long, at least the drummer and the bass player. But we did write music, and we went into the studio almost immediately to record. That was the first thing we did. We wrote four or five songs, I think it was. Went and recorded it. Got the stuff played on the radio, and then we started sending the tapes out. We were all part of like that tape trading culture back then, and I'm not sure how the tape got into Roadrunner's hands, but Case, the owner of the label, actually called us out of the blue one day. And I had actually forgotten this. Steve Post, our bass player, reminded me that he was at practice one day and the phone rang, and it was Case Wessels, the owner of Roadrunner, going, "Hey, I really like your stuff. Can we release this as it is?" And we were like, no, that's a demo. It's horrible. Why would you release it? Let us record something new. Meanwhile, what happened is we ended up moving on from the original drummer and bass player. We didn't really have a meeting of the minds in terms of direction. They were a little bit more, how do I say this, glam oriented, and we were a little bit more like jeans and t-shirt guys. And we kept Doug in the band, and we did a second demo called Final Solution. And looking back on it, really, it was really more of like a self-released album, because the quality was a lot better. The songwriting was better. And then we sent that off to Roadrunner and kind of never heard anything again, kind of strange. Meanwhile, being part of that tape culture, cassette tapes, in the mail, we were taking tapes and we were sending them to like every radio station we could find, every magazine we could find, just to get a review or get it played. And one of those people was Monty Connor from Roadrunner. At the time, he was a DJ at some New York area college, and I don't know which college it was, maybe Staten Island College or something like that. And then he ended up interning for Roadrunner and taking our tapes and presenting them to their A&R people. And the next thing we know, we have a conversation going with Roadrunner again, and before we knew it, we had a deal signed. Unfortunately, we couldn't keep our original singer, Doug. We loved his voice, but he had a couple of issues, basically. Some of it, involved, some personal things. Some of it was kind of, drug and alcohol related, where, we were like really starting to do pretty well. And he would show up to gigs and he wouldn't be able to perform because he had partied so much the night before. It's like, "Sorry, man, I lost my voice," that kind of thing. It's like, "Oh my God, there's 1,000 people out there and you can't sing," that kind of thing. So, we ended up getting Mark back in the band, and fortunately, we had that connection with him. Recorded another demo that never was released, by the way, but had a lot of the tracks from the first record. And that in combination with a live video, and some of that live video is out on YouTube of us performing at the Jabberwocky, which is like a local club here. And I think really what sold Roadrunner ultimately was seeing like the energy of the crowd. It's like, okay, you guys sound great, but do people even like you? Was really kind of the attitude. And once they saw that we had not only an audience, but an enthusiastic, out of their mind kind of audience, as metal crowds were back then, it was pretty quick to sign the deal from that point on. So by the time we signed, recorded, and released, I think maybe 6 months went by, and then a few months later, we were out on the road supporting that first record. And that was '88. that happened.
And what memories do you have recording the first album, which turned out to be Endless War right here, right?
Yes, and a lot of really fond ones, actually. I mean, we worked on a pretty shoestring budget. We didn't have a lot of money up front, but we had the same engineer and producer that helped us with our Final Solution tape, and Roadrunner was very happy to hire him back because they liked what Final Solution sounded like. And so we went into a local studio here to do the tracking. I think it was Breezeway Studios out in Waukesha. Then we took those tracks to a studio in Antioch, and I forget the guy's name that ran the place, but it was a studio where some of the Ohio Players records came from. So that's like a different genre of music. But the reason we went there is because our producer liked their gear and their compressors and whatever. And so we got to mix. And then the whole process really was maybe 7, 8, 10 days of tracking, and then like a week and a half of mixing. Where we barely slept, because we had so much work to do and we only had so much money, and studios time was very, very expensive back then. It wasn't like it is now where everybody's got a studio on their laptop. To get to proper gear, you had to pay a lot of money. But regardless, we were really happy with the result. The label loved the result too. Really very much, what I think of as kind of like a glimpse of time in our history. Because we were all going through a lot of really challenging situations at that point, personally and professionally and otherwise. Everybody's life was in a transition mode.
How would you say that album do?
Well, I thought it did pretty well. It did well enough to keep us on the label and do a second record with a much bigger budget. In terms of sales figure, I have no idea, honestly, at this point. I haven't seen a royalty statement in a really long time. Most of the sales were real strong up front. I do remember pretty distinctly, though, like seeing some of the first statements. And the thing that struck me is that we were selling as many records in like Germany as we were selling in the United States. So like Germany was like a really strong market for us. And generally speaking, the European market was better for sales for us than the American market. But that's not atypical of metal. Metal is, kind of like that.
Yeah. Was the band touring at that point to promote the album?
Yeah, we did. We did a tour with the first record. We also did what I call micro tours, like little jaunts with various bands, where you go out for a couple of weeks. These days, people call that a tour, but when I think of a tour, I think of like months on the road, not like a couple of gigs. But we did a bunch of those. So, like for example, like some of the more notable ones is like when Testament came through in between our records, we went out with them, and we went out with Death Angel and a couple of other bands of that nature, and we would do like 10, 20 dates, and so if you call that a tour, I guess. The second album, we did a full tour on that one as well. Although it was kind of interesting juxtaposition on the first tour, we headlined our own tour, right? And we brought out another band from town here called Acrofet, which was handled by the same manager at the time. And I actually enjoyed doing that more because we played smaller venues, right? And granted, the crowds are really small, but they were there to see us. You know what I mean? There's something different about, opening for somebody and playing a half-hour set, or doing like a full hour 15 or more playing, and you're headlining. Even if it's only 20 people in the audience, it's kind of a nicer vibe, because it's your show.
Considering the strong sales in Germany and overseas, did you ever make it out there to play for those fans?
No, ironically, no. We would always run into kind of like little hiccups, and sometimes it would be financial, for example, like, oh, hey, we burned through all the tour support already. We can't afford to send you to Europe, or, whatever the case may be. Like some people had regular day jobs, and families and homes, and Roadrunner, I'll tell you, Roadrunner didn't like that about us, because for being a pretty young band, most of the people they would deal with, it's like they're single guys living at home with their parents, or some other kind of situation like that. And didn't really require a lot of money to keep things going at home. Realm was different. We had, I think, 3 out of the 4 guys in the band were married with children in homes. I was an exception. And so that they always saw that as a hindrance to going on the road. And we were like, no, that's not a hindrance. it's a hindrance in your mind because you have to spend more money to get us on the road, because we have to keep the lights on at home, as we say.
2 years later, Society comes out. This lovely record here.
Yes.
What kind of a progress was made since the first album?
Well, I think significant progress was made, and I know a lot of the people who are like our old school fans kind of like the Final Solution, Endless War era of Realm, but as a band, we were growing and maturing in our playing and our songwriting, and although I think there's maybe a couple issues with the mix on that record, I think, like, for example, as I've said in many interviews, I think the guitars could have been a little bit louder. But otherwise, performance-wise, the songs, I think it's on a different level. I think it's a significantly stronger performance by us, despite whether the fans might like it more or not. Ironically, what I found in retrospect, even though a lot of people didn't like the second record when it came out, including the label, they really didn't like it very much. Bands or people that were introduced to us by first hearing the second record think it's amazing and don't like the first record, so they have that kind of perspective on it. And they don't look at it the same way. They don't see it as the progression that happened. They see it as like, wow, this is really cool music, I want more, and so I mean, personally, I like the second record much better. I like the material on it better. The amount of time we got in the studio to make it right was better. The artwork is better. All those things. So it becomes kind of a personal thing, and it's unfortunate we didn't get to like record number 3 with Roadrunner, so you could see where we were going after that, because there's definitely a progression. We weren't one of those bands that was going to stick with a certain style and ride that through our career.
And how supportive was Roadrunner for the second album?
Let's say, the relation kind of soured as the record was being released, is really kind of a polite way to say it. And not that we had major issues with them, but we didn't feel like we were watching other bands, that are on the same label. And we knew that there was a change happening in metal, right? Roadrunner knew it too. And this is why Monty is such a brilliant metal guy, is because he was watching the death metal thing coming up, and the vocals were switching, and grunge was coming out. And now it's no longer fashionable to have a singer who can sing or hit a high note. Now it's more fashionable to yell or scream or growl, right? And to tune down and to kind of lose the melody of the music. That was not what we were about, right? And for a little bit, we were kind of buying into that hype. But at the same time, while we were mixing that second record, our manager at the time was taking our mixes and shopping them to the major labels. And you know what? We got a nibble. We got a nibble from Island Records. And in fact, we had their A&R people come out to a few shows. And we were at the point where we were discussing terms for the contract. Hey, we're going to put you out on tour with Anthrax, yada, yada, yada. Next thing we know, they get bought out. The deal goes away. And then Roadrunner's like, okay, where's the master tapes? We need to put this record out. And so the release of the record was hurried a little bit at the last moment, where we really wanted to remix a couple of things. Hey, but it is what it is. Sometimes you can't control those things. Back then, people didn't take so long to release albums. We had waited almost 2 years to release another record, and that was too long for Roadrunner. They wanted it to keep going. But they were also in tune to the fact that the music was changing, metal was changing.
So the 2 albums from Roadrunner, are they still available? Do you have the rights to these masters? How does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I always have this bad habit of saying, when somebody asks me a question that's a good question, I'm saying, hey, that's a good question. So I apologize for saying it's a good question. But the way that we signed that deal, there's some really interesting aspects to it. And I think one of the more interesting things is it did not even consider the aspect of streaming. So to this date, people go, hey, why isn't your stuff on Spotify? And it's like, well, we haven't put it there. That's why it's not there. Can you still get the record? I think if you hunt around, you can find it. I still have a box or two of each of those sealed CDs. I even have some vinyl that's sealed yet. And when we did some reunion shows about 3 years ago, I did break open the box and sell some copies. This time around, like the festival that you came to, I was going to do the same thing. And then Steve, our bass player, is like, "Why are you doing that, man? These are super rare. Did you see what they sell for on eBay?" And then I started thinking, I'm like, maybe he's right. I'm not gonna even sell these. I'm just gonna hold on to them. So I don't think you can like buy them on a wholesale level. So it's like whatever's out in the market is out in the market.
Mhm.
We did a re-release in '06 of both records with Metal Mind from Poland, licensed through Roadrunner, and I think they did a pressing of like 2,000 or 3,000, and they're all remastered and numbered and all those kind of things. I don't think the remaster sounds as good as the original though. Like old mixes on records were not quite so compressed. Like the early CDs, they have a huge dynamic range, and to me, it sounds more powerful, right? Because music has quiet parts and loud parts. Metal tends to be loud all the way through, but even metal has quieter and louder parts. And the remasters, to me, lost some of that dynamic range. As far as where the rights sit now, that's kind of we signed a little bit different deal than a lot of the other Roadrunner bands did. We actually retained a portion, and in some cases, all of the publishing for some of the material. So like when, we get like radio play or whatever, or sales, we do actually make money off of it. And there were trade-offs to get to that. And at some point, all of the rights, from my recollection, and I'm not reading the contract here, do revert back to us. So I'm not sure when that point is, but I think it's pretty soon. And then when that happens, we're thinking about, okay, maybe we'll repackage and re-release, and we'll do it our way. Heck, we might even remix it. Who knows? That's not even certain.
So by 1992, you're done with Roadrunner, but you did a demo. What was the music like at that point?
Well, I thought it was really cool. We kept writing, like I said, we kept progressing as songwriters, and we weren't necessarily being, intentionally trying to fit into any metal category. So we didn't like watch like the death metal scene take off and then say, you know what, we want to be like that. That was not at all us. We always had a melodic aspect to us, and we always tried to write material that was really challenging to play, much to my detriment now trying to relearn it. Like doing that show, it's like there's so much work that has to go into playing like an hour-long show, and it's like, why did I do this to myself? I should have wrote easier music. But that was one of the things we did, is we wrote stuff that was really technically challenging, very much on purpose, kind of pushing our capabilities, but also thinking, people want to hear good music. So, and I don't know if you agree with this, Mark, but people get easily bored with stuff. So when bands come out and they all sound the same, it's like, okay, that's great. That sounds like this band mixed with that band. It's nothing new. We're more of the mindset, we want to create something fresh always moving forward. And even if that took us away from being heavy, that's not what happened. But, so we wrote stuff that maybe wasn't as fast as some of the earlier stuff, but we wrote stuff that was much more technical. We also covered a King Crimson song, which we did on that Basement demo. And the demo was basically us at rehearsal with a mix going to 2 tracks on a 4-track cassette player, and the other 2 tracks are vocals and solos. And so you can find it out on the internet. So like if you look up on YouTube, there's people that have digitized it and put it out. There's 3 songs: Cast the First Stone, The Final Argument of Kings, and then that King Crimson cover. That King Crimson cover was later redone and put on Suicide as a bonus track for the re-release. So you can hear a version of that. But then we also went into the studio right before we disbanded, and we had, I think it was 6 or 7 additional songs aside from those that tracks exist. They're in various states of completion. I'm trying to recall like song titles. I don't remember all the song titles, but we did have basically an album's worth of music sitting there still unfinished. So potentially, without having to write anything fresh, we'd have an album's worth of stuff to put out. We could maybe remix that old stuff, or re-record it, or what have you. But from a creative standpoint, it's always kind of difficult to backtrack. I mean, because where I am now as a musician and a human being in my life, I see things a lot differently than 30 years ago. And if I was to create something now, it might have flavors of the past, but it would be something new. And yeah, and so there's that.
Well, you're definitely on the right track, even based on the response you got at the Blades of Steel Festival. I mean, amazing response. But you mentioned the band split up. How come?
Well, it was a lot of different reasons. Like when you're signed, and you got a label behind you, and you got a big booking agency behind you, and a manager, and all these mechanisms working for you, you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're moving, right? And even after we lost the deal, we kept positivity. So we're going to write more, we're going to record more, we're just going to find a different label and just keep going. Unfortunately, what happened is a lot of it was kind of, so we had some issues, right? So like internally, the label didn't like Mark. They didn't like Mark singing because he's a high singer. Everybody, they're putting out Obituary and Sepultura and bands like that. And here we got, we have like King Diamond, that kind of thing. And we were kind of agreeing with them. We were like, okay, well, we see your point. Maybe we can get Mark to sing differently and it will be cool, right? And that's really kind of the wrong answer, I think, because whenever anybody has a natural style, you don't push them away from their natural style. You run with it, is what I always say. Maybe what we should have done is found somebody else, and that's kind of what happened. And Mark's like, well, hey, I'm kind of done with this. I'm out of here. So he quit the band. Shortly thereafter, Mike, our drummer, left the band and went to somebody else. And then we're stuck looking again. So now we're kind of like, the progress that we were making is now stuck in the mud because now we don't have a drummer. So, okay, first we have to fill that position because you can't really try out singers without a drummer. So we found a fantastic drummer in Brian Reitinger, somebody we just saw playing in the clubs, and he just blew us away with his technique. And then we started looking for a singer. And, my first thought was like, well, hey, there's this band that was on our label, Last Crack, and they're out in Madison. That's an hour away from us. He's an awesome singer. He's not a growler, but he's not a King Diamond either. So he's just got a great melodic voice. I was always a huge fan, so I just kept bugging him. And eventually what he did is he came down and recorded vocals over some of the studio tracks that we had done as an audition. Of course, he did an amazing job. And then shortly thereafter, we decided, all right, this is the new lineup and we'll start writing new music. But then we also decided this is not Realm anymore, because where we were going was, oh gosh, I don't even know what to call it. It was kind of like, to me, kind of like what I would call vanilla metal or something. It wasn't like super heavy, but it wasn't rock and roll either. And we just recently remixed and remastered and re-released that on Heaven and Hell Records. So White Fear Chain is the name of the band, and the release is Visceral Life. Mm-hmm. And the remixed version sounds amazing. It sounds like it was recorded yesterday.
How long did that last?
Well, I guess that lasted about, till about 94, 95, 96, I guess. Mm-hmm. At some point, I decided to leave that project because I didn't feel like it was going anywhere. Kind of foolish on my part. I realize that now. I should have stuck with it. But yeah, we got basically a couple of good years in there where we just sat down and woodshedded, I think, for a good solid year, just writing music before we even hit the stage. But then we started hitting the stage and kept writing. But the talent pool just blows my mind, because when you know the musicians in that band, I mean, I feel, I don't even know what the word is, lucky as all hell to have played with people that were that talented,
Absolutely. Realm reunites in 2019. What sparked this reunion?
Unfortunately, the death of Paul Aganowski, our one of our original members. He was the other guitar player. I forget the year now because it goes so quick, but he was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer, really horrible. It didn't take long before he passed away. And then we had a celebration of life, kind of basically a funeral. And we, at the event, we just got up and played a few songs unrehearsed. We just did it, and we're like, yeah, that's pretty good considering we didn't practice at all. Maybe there's something here. And because people knew that we played, all of a sudden we started getting offers for shows. One of them came from the Wisconsin music industry, and they have a kind of like, like an award show in Wisconsin, and they inducted us into their Hall of Fame. We played at that award show and then did a concert the night before. And then we thought, okay, we're done, right? But then more offers keep coming, right? And they're still coming. And probably the most notable one is, Oliver, who runs the Keep It True Festival in Germany, invited us to come out and play. And actually, if we would have followed through with it, we would probably be either on our way or there already to play, like, I think Friday or Saturday this week, But we decided to put it off for another year just because of some of the travel challenges. For us, we don't all live in the same place. So we have people that live all over the country. So it's not like we get together and rehearse every week. For Blades of Steel, I think we had 2 run-throughs, with the whole band, and then up on stage playing. Unfortunately, we were able to pull it off to some degree. But with Keep It True, we want to make sure that when we do that, we do it really well. So we're waiting another year before we go.
You mentioned Paul, who passed away in 2017. What memories do you have of Paul?
Well, Mark, if you ever got to know Paul was one of those guys that was kind of like a shining beacon in a dark room. And I don't mean that in kind of like a corny kind of way, but he really did have this personality that no matter how grim things would seem, he would shed a light, or the humor that would break through it all. And really his positive attitude shone through everything. It was really a large part as to why we succeeded in the first place, because he just had this really strong belief that we would, and that does carry a long way. So I always think about that. I think about his attitude. I think about his humor. And he always had these really bizarre ways of creating music. He would never write your common riff or chord pattern, or it always had to be something really messed up, weird time signature, or why the hell are you playing that note with that note? That doesn't make, I see, that kind of thing. So he brought something different to the table, and was really, I think, part of the reason why we sounded unique is because of his voice and writing.
Who is taking his place in the band as you play out live?
Well, right now we have a local friend of ours. His name is Paul Tyrion. I met Paul Tyrion from a short stint I did playing in the band Metallica. They did a tour and they needed a guitar player, so I learned their songs, went out on the road with them, and Paul was playing bass in that band. And later on, my daughter ended up taking guitar lessons from Paul, and one day I walked into lessons and said, "Hey, can I talk with you?" And he thought we were going to quit lessons, is what he thought. But I said, "Hey, man, we got a gig coming up. You want to play guitar with Realm?" And he said, "Yeah." And so that's why. Now I don't know how permanent this is, because lately I think Paul has gone through some transitions. So 2 guys named Paul, right? That's kind of weird too. I'm not sure how interested he is in moving forward or not, but I think when we go to Keep It True, we're hoping that he's playing second guitar. Whether we do something moving forward or not, I'm not sure what the picture holds at this point. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball,
How did your lives change during the time when Realm was not a band? What is everyone doing?
Well, I think, some of us continued with music, and some of us didn't. And I was one of the ones, so I did Realm and then White Fear Chain. But while I was doing all of that, I was going to school pretty heavily. And, I got through, associates, 2 bachelors and a master's degree during that time frame while I was doing all that. And then I started working in IT, and got married, had a family, bought a house, etc. And it's really hard to be in music and give it your all when those things are going on. It's a challenge, right? When you have, especially when you have young kids at home. I think Mark was kind of in the same boat. He moved away from Milwaukee, went to New Jersey, raised his family out there. And I don't think Mark ever went back to music until we did our reunion. I did a little bit. I had a couple little projects that I toyed with and did recording with, a few bands. I like recorded some tracks with Mortiscult, for example. Whatever, so I just kind of stayed away from it. I even had a period where I didn't even touch the guitar for maybe a year or two. It's not that I don't have enough of them, but I really kind of felt like I had burnt out the path. I was kind of like sick of the lifestyle, sick of the whole thing. Now that I'm kind of circling back to it a little bit, it's because my life is in, a little bit different place. And I'm also approaching it, I think, from a more healthy perspective, where it's about the music. It's not about all the other stuff, and really, frankly, and I can't help it. I just love playing the guitar. I love the gear. I love, I don't know, all that stuff, like I can just sit there for hours and research pedals, for example, and just, call that a night, I'm just into it. So.
Now, recently, and you've mentioned that before, you perform a great show at Blades of Steel Festival. How long does it take to get ready for a show like that by a band that is not an active band?
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of work. So, fortunately, everybody else in the band, they're pretty much active musicians. So Mike's been playing the whole time, pretty much. Steve's been playing. I mean, when we got together with Steve recently, I asked him, how many bands have you been in, dude? And he was like, I don't know, like 35, 40 different bands, sometimes like 4, 5, 6 at a time, and so like right now he's kind of got that kind of thing going. And it's kind of weird, so it takes a while, right? Because when I had to relearn the Realm stuff, first of all, I was like, all right, I know this shouldn't be hard, right? I wrote this stuff. I should be able to, relearn my own riffs. But man, what I forgot is like, oh wait, we wrote stuff that was like on the edge of our playing capability when we were in peak form, it took a lot to try to get back up to speed. Playing stuff slow was fine. Playing stuff up to speed was a challenge. And then came the issue where it's like, well, those were my parts. Paul and I never played the same guitar parts. Very rarely did we hit the same chord at the same time. It was always like in harmony or parallel or whatever. And so I had to relearn all of his stuff to show it to the other Paul, so it was like double homework. So the first time we did a reunion show, it took a lot of time, to kind of relearn all that stuff. Fortunately, with the pandemic, our shows got delayed a couple of years, so I had plenty of time to woodshed this time and really get the riffs right. But we really didn't have a lot of rehearsals. So in between the first reunion show in 2019 and the one that we just played, we had 2 practices basically as a band, the 2 nights leading up to the show. We did a little bit of like, hey, how does this riff go back and forth, but never a full band practice, And so it does make it a challenge, right? And I like to say it was a great performance, but I know better. I know where all the fuck ups were.
The artists are always super critical of themselves, especially when it comes to things that no one else notices but you.
Right.
Yeah. Now,
you just played 500 notes and I messed up one of them. Did you notice?
Yeah. Were you surprised that after so many years of inactivity, you had such a great reaction from the crowd?
I'm going to say yes and no. I mean, it floors me to this day, and it did even back in the day. It's like I remember like the first tour we did, and like you leave your hometown and you go somewhere else, and you're playing your songs, and you wrote the words, and there's somebody standing up in front singing along every word, right? And it's like, I mean, that's a really great compliment. It means not only did they listen to it, but they memorized it, right? So how much are they listening? So, and when we did our first reunion, and even at this Blades of Steel, there were people that came in from distant parts of the country just to see us. It was like, man, I've always wanted to see you guys. I flew in from wherever, and like, wow. I mean, that's a great compliment. I'm humbled by it, really.
Will there be any new music coming from Realm?
Well, it's funny that you asked that. We recently had a conversation, and a little bit of it is kind of being prompted by outside forces too. But we talked about it, and we're like, hey, and I had this conversation with Steve and Mike mostly. It's like, hey, do you guys want to try to create some new stuff? And Mike, the drummer, is like, yeah, man, I'm totally down with that. I'm tired with this other stuff I'm doing. I want to do something that's cool. And Steve feels the same way. So we haven't really formally done it yet, but I have like a huge backlog of ideas. I sit, sometimes and I just write riffs and record them and whatever. And I'm trying to think of like what might be good things to work with on this project. So we'll see where it goes, And I have interest from, various factions if we do something to help us propel it forward. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
There's hope.
So there's absolutely hope.
When you look back at the entire career of Realm, are there any regrets?
Yeah, there always there's regrets, I guess, but and at the same time, no. I mean, really, I think life ended up the way it should have. I mean, I could say that, hey, I wish I would have done this instead of that, or we should have. One regret maybe is that when we finally had a record deal and we were moving, why did we stay in Milwaukee, Wisconsin? Our thought was like, hey, we should be able to make it from anywhere if you're a good band. It doesn't matter what town you live in. But the reality is the industry at the time, at least in the United States, was basically Los Angeles and New York. And if you were there, that's where all the labels were. That's where all the touring agents were. All the stuff that was happening was in those places. And we really should have moved to one or the other, or been even braver and maybe moved to Europe, and done it there. But you know what? It's not really a regret. I mean, it's just kind of hindsight is 2020. Like you see it clearly when you get older, but at the time it didn't seem like the thing to do. But you know what? You can't lament what choice you didn't make. You made the choice you made. I'm happy with our legacy. If I was to do nothing else, I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. Nothing to be embarrassed about there. The fact that people are still interested is really kind of cool,
Finally, fondest memories.
Wow, loaded question. Some of the fondest memories are ones that I don't always want to share publicly, I guess. But well, I'll tell you what. I think probably my fondest memories are the fact that the people that I worked with in the band, and that kind of extends beyond the band members. So it's kind of like the five guys of the band, our wives, girlfriends, families, and then our crew, which was just really an amazing bunch of people. And when we did Blades of Steel, all these people reconvene, the ones that are left alive. And that's the sad part, because out of our huge entourage that we had, we lost our sound man, our merch guy, our guitar tech, our guitar player, his wife. And when I start to think about that, and it's like when you start to lose people and then you get back together again, and it's like, this isn't as cool because they're not here. You know what I mean? And if they were here, it would be awesome. You know what I mean? Because it's really hard, like when I do the Realm stuff, Paul Leganowski was such a big part of creating the music. And like I said, he was like this shining beacon in a room of darkness. How do you replace that in a band? You really kind of don't. I mean, we can kind of imitate the spirit of it, but he was so integral, so I miss them. I mean, I'll just put it like that, so my fondest memories are just all the people that I got to hang out with and work with, and we did it together, and it was kind of a team effort. That was the coolest part of it.
Thank you for speaking with me, and good luck with whatever future may bring.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for interviewing me.